Hi, I'm John Latham, and this is my pilot assignment, the 1984 World's Fair. It was held in New Orleans from May until November of 1984. I actually went to this fair in the summer of 1984. I got to see this, so I think my pilot assignment is a little bit unique, is that it's something from Louisiana history that not only do I remember, but I was there for. The theme was the world of rivers, fresh waters as a source of life. They had 6 little villages and a little river that was going through it. Also, the World's Fair area was on the edge of the Mississippi River. If you've ever been on a cruise out of New Orleans, chances are you've boarded the cruise ship in the area where the New Orleans World's Fair was. The 84 World's Fair was held 100 years after the city's earlier World's Fair, the World Cotton Centennial of 1884. Here's just a couple old pictures. If you look at the one on the right, if you've been to the Audubon Park and Audubon Zoo in New Orleans, and you've been to the location of the 1884 World's Fair, that's where it was held. All right, an 84-acre site of land along the Mississippi River was cleared of rundown warehouses to make way for fair structures. I think it's peculiar, or kind of funny, and probably done on purpose, that they used 84 acres for the 84 World's Fair. Here's a couple little maps. They might be kind of hard to see, but they'll have some better pictures later. I don't know if you can see me pointing to this. This is the Crescent City connection, the bridge right here. The French Quarter would be more towards the right over here, and the Superdome would be more, I guess, upper area from what's right here, what you're seeing on these maps. Like I said, there'll be some better pictures later. The fair drew approximately 7 million visitors. It was not enough to recoup the $350 million spent on the event. Some estimates were as much as 30,000 fewer visitors per day showed up than were expected. Employee paychecks were bouncing. Government had to step in. That's pretty much the only thing that kept the gates open. This Louisiana license plate right here, I remember whenever I was a kid seeing these everywhere. The bright blue, I remember that really well. The top is one of the main entrances of the fair. I think these sculptures are actually on the LSU campus right now. And Governor Dave Treen, Vice President George H.W. Bush, and Seymour De Faire, who is the fair mascot. I actually have a little bit more on him later, but that's them having a groovy time there at the fair. All right. Many contribute the low attendance to the fact that the World's Fair was just held 2 years earlier in Knoxville, Tennessee, like 500 miles away. It wasn't far at all. Some believe that the attendance was low because the fair was being held at the same time as the 84 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. And folks, that was huge. I remember whenever I was a kid hearing about the Olympics, I thought it was the first one that was ever held whenever I was 7 years old. But obviously it wasn't, but it was a gigantic thing. And then there was the newly opened Epcot Center at Disney World just a couple years earlier, which is essentially a World's Fair all the time. So you had a World's Fair 2 years earlier, 500 miles away. You got the World's Fair going on all the time, all year round in Florida. And then you got sunny Southern California hosting the Olympics, which comes around every 4 years and doesn't come to the United States that often, even less common. So, or you can go spend it in hot New Orleans, a World's Fair that we just went to a couple of years ago. I don't think the planning was all that great, but that's what happened. That's what they did. Let's see, the 84 World's Fair was plagued with attendance problems. It was also the only World's Fair to ever declare bankruptcy during its run. Michael Scott, I declare bankruptcy. That's our fair. Let's see, major exhibits are a hallmark of World's Fairs. The 1984 New Orleans World's Fair had none. Many predicted the World's Fair would be a flop because of this. The major exhibits, permanent stuff. A lot of times new inventions were debuted, new foods and stuff were debuted at fairs. I think hot dogs or corn dogs were debuted at the fairs, at a World's Fair 100 years ago. Cherry Coke, teleconferencing, all that was done at World's Fairs. The New Orleans Fair didn't have any of that. Ta-da! Seymour De Faire was the mascot of the 84 World's Fair. If you look right here, you can see him breakdancing. Yep. And that's the Hilton downtown, right, or on the river right behind him. Just to the right of that would be the Mississippi River. It kind of gives you an idea where he is. But he's breakdancing. That was huge in 1884. Most of y'all weren't around. Y'all don't remember that, but it was a big deal. Let's see, on a promotion trip to Paris, to the Louvre Museum, Seymour was kicked out of the Louvre for being too spectacular. The Louvre Museum, that's where paintings like the Mona Lisa hang. So this little dude was in there being too spectacular. The French did not like it. Kicked him out. Leno. Alright, some of the better known attractions. The USS Lexington aircraft carrier. It was docked on the river and available for tours. The carrier was in service at the time, and while in New Orleans, its crew enjoyed their time away from the ship. Supposedly they had a really good time while they were in New Orleans while the ship was docked for tours. This aircraft carrier, it's on a display now as a museum in Corpus Christi. So if you ever go down to Corpus Christi and take the tour of the museum ship, aircraft carrier, that's actually the one. That ship was also used in the movie, I can't remember, it's the one with Ben Affleck, Pearl Harbor. It was actually dressed up to be the carriers that they used in the movies for the Americans and the Japanese. But that's that. Let's see. The Space Shuttle Enterprise. Let me tell you how lame this is. Okay, they had a space shuttle there. This thing never went into space. It didn't even have engines on it. Even as a 7-year-old little kid, I was excited to see a spaceship, and they said, yeah, it never went to space. It never doesn't even fly. I was like, oh, well, that's a bummer. What it was a space shuttle that they would launch off this 747 right here, and they would practice landing in. That's all it was. Never went to space. Never even went close. It didn't even have engines. Couldn't even fly. But right here, you can see the Crescent City connection being built behind it, where it was shown. That's one of the which is the Highway 90 bridge. The north lane wasn't even finished being constructed. That was another problem. The state told them that it would be ready for the 84 fair, but it was not ready for another 4 years. So imagine that. The Wonderwall was this crazy looking wall. It stretched for about a mile, kind of meandered through the park area, through the fair area. It was just crazy sculptures and everything, and found out later it was to conceal a lot of power lines that were not buried. So yeah, they had this big scaffolding with all this stuff on it. As a little kid, I thought it was pretty neat. All the flying alligators. Let's see, on Fulton Street is where most of the nightlife happened. On the bars and all the fun stuff going on like that. One of the most remembered places was a bar called Sheila's. It was an Australian place. And it introduced most Americans to Foster's beer. And Foster's was sold in the United States in a few places, but it was really brought out in the United States for the 84 World's Fair. Foster's, Australian for beer. It's the old commercials, that's how they go. The Monorail. The Monorail would shuttle visitors around the fairgrounds on an elevated track. Here you can see some photos of it. Originally it was free, but when the fair began to hemorrhage money, they started charging people $1 to ride it. And they had about 4 or 5 stops on the course. It meandered throughout the park. When the fair was over, they dismantled it and moved it to the Miami Zoo, and it's still being used. So if you go to the zoo in Miami and you ride the monorail, you were on the monorail that was at the New Orleans World's Fair, and the best known attraction was the Mississippi River Aerial Transit. I actually misspelled that. The Mississippi Aerial River Transit is how that should be, because the acronym was MART. The MART spanned 2,300 feet across the Mississippi River. It carried 53 cars at a height of 300 feet in the air. And as a 7-year-old little kid, I found this ride to be terrifying. And you'll see why in a moment. My family still thinks it's funny. This thing was awful. It's hard to see in these photos, but these towers leaned at a pretty crazy angle. But yeah, these are the towers, and there was one on one side, and it took you to Algiers. So great. This one was on the Algiers side. So once you're there, you're in Algiers. Great. So you got to turn around and come back, because as little as there is in Algiers now, there was even less back then. But like this photo down here, that's the next car down. That thing, it was awful. I hated it. And these things, I think they kind of look like the world engines from the Man of Steel movie from about 5 years ago, too. Whenever I saw the movie, I was like, hey, those are the towers from the cable car at the World's Fair. Yikers! Let's see, the mart stayed open for about a year after the fair closed. It was used by local commuters to travel between New Orleans and Algiers. Ridership was about half of what was predicted, so they closed it down. The tower stood for another 10 years before they finally tore those down in 1984, or 1994 they tore them down. In 85, the French bank that loaned them the money to construct the mart filed suit on them when they defaulted on their $8 million loan. A federal court ordered the mart operators to pay back $6.2 million to the bank. Nothing's really remaining at all of the mart other than a few gondola cars. You might see a few of these around New Orleans in the warehouse district and stuff. They're just used as decoration. And it was featured in the 1985 movie French Quarter Undercover, which is a terrible movie, so if you have a chance to see that movie, pass on that. Let's see, it cost riders $3.50, which is $8.72 in today's money, to take the 4-minute ride across the river. On its maiden voyage, Archbishop Philip Hannon blessed the mart. And not surprisingly, shortly after the blessing, the ride promptly stalled out, leaving the riders stranded hundreds of feet above the Mississippi River. Yep, that's our fair. Let's see, while the fair was a financial flop, and according to our book, a colossal failure, there was some good that resulted in it. Most people have fond memories of the fair. I have fond memories of the fair for the most part. There's a couple things I didn't like, and I'll get to those in a moment. But the Jack's Brewery was revitalized into a shopping mall. Poydras Street was a dump, and it kind of cleaned it up. Portions of the exhibit area is now a shopping area known as the Riverwalk. So if you've been to the Riverwalk, then you've been to some of the World's Fair structures. That's it. The concert venue held 5,000 people and was right next to the Mississippi River. The back of the stage would open up curtains and you could see the river. And the day I went, NXS performed, which was awesome. I don't know if you know who NXS is, but look up NXS. You'll thank me later. This is the Monorail Convention Center. This is building one of the Monorail Convention Center. It housed the State of Louisiana exhibit for the World's Fair. So that's still there. Some of my memories of the 84 World's Fair, besides being scared to death of Mart, are the main entrance on Poydras Street, because they had these topless mermaids, and I just thought that was so funny. This giant concrete head, which is still there today. I remember the bad smell of New Orleans. I just remember how much it stunk when I was a little kid. And I had my very first McRib at the McDonald's there at the fair. They had a little McDonald's stand there, and that's where I had my first McRib. Haven't stopped. Alright, here's some photos before and after. This photo here on the top left is taken from this hotel right here. This is the Hilton. So it kind of gives you both an idea. Also, it shows you that's where the Superdome is. The French Quarter is over off to the right. Let's see, they had some music that string bands would play for the construction workers while they built the place. This photo right here is taken from the Hilton as well. This one's just from that vicinity, but this one definitely is. And you can see this is 1 month before it opened. And you can see the Mart Tower right here. See how much it leans? That was terrifying for a little kid. And you can see the monorail that meandered through. This was the concert venue right here. And this is the exhibition hall, which is now the River Walk and the Monorail Convention Center. Fulton Street, where people were drinking Foster's beer, was back over this way. All right, and here's 3 discussion questions. Would it be beneficial or even advisable for Louisiana to try to host another World's Fair? My answer would be no. It would be not beneficial or advisable for any city to host a World's Fair. I think they've kind of run their course. And in fact, ever since the 1984 debacle of the 84 World's Fair in New Orleans, there has not been an American city to have a World's Fair. They've all been in other countries. So yeah, I don't think it's beneficial or even advisable to do it. When more major exhibits have helped boost attendance to the 84 World's Fair, I don't think so. Maybe, but my opinion is no. Would the fair have been successful if it had happened in a year other than 1984? Remember the Olympics going on at the same time. The World's Fair 2 years earlier in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then there was Epcot Center just a few hundred miles away in Florida. And I would have to say no to that question as well. I don't think it would have been successful if it happened in 82, 83, 85, or even now. I just don't think it would be successful at all. But that's all my opinion. And that's that. That's a wrap. That is the end of my pilot assignment. I had a little trouble getting it loaded up from the cloud, so I decided to do it this way. I hope you enjoyed it, and leave me some comments, some constructive criticism, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.